Hello and welcome to Understanding Transitional Justice. Our topic this week is about construction of memory or politics of forgetting. What we want to do is to raise the question as to whether it is better, as the conventional construction has it, that events should be remembered, should be memorialized, should be placed into history, that people should be reminded of them, that we should try to make them a part of public consciousness, or is it better not to do that? We tend to assume most of the time, and it's even taken the status of a slogan, that we should never forget, that it's better to reveal the truth, to know it, to confront it. And I want to raise at least the possibility, or raise the discussion around the fact that this might not be the case. And here's the way that I would pitch it. A lot of the language of transitional justice is borrowed from the language of clinical psychology, therapy that is directed toward individuals. The idea that it is best for people, it is healthiest for them, and by analogy, healthiest for societies, to remember, to work through their memories, to overcome trauma, to achieve a kind of catharsis. All of these ideas can be traced to the origin of psychoanalysis, to the propositions that were put out originally by people like Sigmund Freud. Let me make a suggestion here, and that is that the validity of this set of assumptions depends on making a number of subsidiary assumptions. What are those assumptions? First, the major assumption here is that society is something like an individual person. That is, that we can make an analogy between the psychic state of an individual and something mythical that sometimes we can sense and sometimes we cannot sense, that can be called the social psyche. A second assumption we make is that the motivations and goals behind processes of post-conflict and post-regime justice are shared across the society, that there is a shared desire to improve, to get better, to reach another state, and that there is a shared vision about what this other state that should be reached looks like. This might not be the case. It's just as likely that it's the case that there is conflict in a society, conflict over what goals are desirable and attainable, and conflict over what the future ought to resemble. A third assumption is an assumption about the facts that need to be known, the things that need to be remembered. And that is the assumption that every fact is demonstrable, every fact is recoverable, that it's possible to reach something like a complete truth, that nothing is hidden. And the fourth assumption that I would point out is an assumption about the character of change that is being represented or embodied or consolidated in post-conflict and post-regime processes, and that is the assumption that the regime change, or the change of order that is brought about, the transition that provides the condition for the justice, is a total change, that it opens up an unlimited set of possibilities. These assumptions, in general, are not always good assumptions. And why are they not always good assumptions? Well, let's say most people, in approaching this kind of material, if they're asked to give an example of one society that has overcome a guilty and painful past and built upon it a new social order that is founded on a different conception of morality, will give as the example post-World War II Germany. There is at least one big difference between the environment of post-World War II Germany and other post-conflict and post-regime environments. One of them is that the facts about what happened in post-World War II Germany are generally known, and they are regularly represented. A second is probably also that Germany reached the post-World War II condition, that is, World War II ended, because Germany was defeated. There was the ability to impose a resolution. This is generally not the case in examples of mass violence and in post-regime and post-conflict transitions. Uh, so let's run with that assumption, or run with that complication that I've just detailed and raise some other complications. The second complication that we need to talk about is that most post-regime and post-conflict transitions are partial rather than complete transitions. And one of the things that this means is that the old elites, the people who would be likely to be held responsible, are generally not entirely gone. The post-communist transitions with which a lot of the people in here are concerned face this difficulty. An extreme case might be the former Soviet Union, but there's a similar difficulty everywhere, which is that the experienced bureaucrats and public officials on whom an incoming regime relies, and this includes experts, experienced administrators, and it also includes security services, police and intelligence and so on, are not only still around, but the incoming regime is going to depend on them. They will not be able to operate their state without them. It is also the case that, hang on just a second, I have to pause the video. I'll be right back. Hi, I'm back again. Sorry about that. That was a neighbor who wanted some jars. She's making jam. In any case, yes. So most regime transitions are partial, and resistance to making information known is not confined only to members of elites. Surveillance states, that is, states where police and other enforcement agencies depend upon gathering a lot of information about their citizens, depend upon mass participation, and this mass participation is often secret. And there is, of course, an interest in a lot of people in keeping it secret. Okay, I would raise another complication, and that is a distinction, is between knowledge, that is, facts being known, as opposed to acknowledgement, that is, that the meaning of facts is generally recognized. These are both goals of truth-finding processes, and they are goals that can come into conflict with one another. Something you'll be hearing of, and particularly be hearing of in the final portion of the presentation, is the re-traumatization thesis. That is the idea that confronting the truth is not therapeutic in all cases. In some cases, it might be traumatic. There is the added danger of what might be called over-acknowledgement. That is the possibility that facts are used to promote and to diffuse an overall socially ambient feeling of guilt that is more unhealthy than healthy for a society. We can also talk about acknowledgement in some different ways. Acknowledgement is generally thought of as recognition, acknowledging an interpretation of the truth and seeking forgiveness. There are other forms of acknowledgement, including forms of acknowledgement that in the end try to justify the violence and other violations that were committed, or that seek to put them into a context in which their meaning is diluted, becomes diffused. But let's assume that all of these complications are somehow resolved or ignored or overcome, and that a general social decision is made to seek truth, to in some way research, to make public and acknowledge truth. What is truth? Now, I know it's possible to ask this as a philosophical question. I want to raise it here as a political sociological question. The first problem with truth is that truth can be used as legitimation. That is, that a history can be produced that is selective, that is partial, that is tendentious, that is designed to fit into an overall narrative of power that might not be consistent with all of the epistemic goals of truth. This problem can be enhanced and deepened by the possibility that truth-telling, the process of looking for, finding, and announcing truth, can be a process that is arranged and conducted secretly or somewhat secretly, confined to closed circles, so that truth appears to be subordinate to an interest, or that truth is not inclusive of the interests of all groups in a society. Similarly, at all times, all processes of truth-telling are subject to the demand for selectivity, that the truth be told partially but not completely. This is often the case when truth-telling processes are supported by powerful international actors who may have their own facts to hide. It's generally the case when you're talking about processes like criminal prosecutions, in which what often happens is that individual direct perpetrators of violations are identified, prosecuted, and punished, but not the people who trained them, who armed them, who financed them, who provided and elaborated the ideas that were used to justify violence. For reasons like this, it is unlikely that a truth commission or other reporting agency is going to tell the whole truth. Underreporting of the truth can happen for a variety of reasons, and sometimes this is not the result of cover-ups or some kind of intentional interference, but instead the result of victims not wanting to report, to relive, or to publicize their experience. This is probably the reason why the least reliably measured type of violence that we have is sexual violence, because of the hesitance in reporting, which are a result of social pressures coming as a result of issues of prestige, of values that are faced by the victims of sexual violence. A final problem with truth is that there's a question when you're finding truth is, are you looking for facts, that is doing forensics, or are you looking for the meanings and causes of facts, that is doing social science? So we could ask, is telling the truth describing what happened or explaining why it happened? Now, as a result of all of these complications, there is often a very strong temptation for people to propose the argument that the time has come or will come, or it is always the time to forgive, to forget, and to move on. This is the main point in several of the polemics around post-conflict and post-regime justice initiatives. We'll be talking about that a little bit in the third segment of this presentation. One of the arguments that's offered in this is the argument that confronting the past is not a helpful social process at all, and this is offered principally on the ground that it prevents achieving the kind of distance that is necessary for healing. Be cautious, by the way, anytime somebody uses a term like healing or catharsis or something like this. These psychological and medical analogies will really only take you so far. But this was the goal of several post-war and post-conflict processes in post-regime Spain after the death of Francisco Franco. There was a public initiative to close the books, not to pursue justice or incidents, not to tell the truth or the whole truth, and to, instead of that, favor reconciliation. This was the approach that was also favored in the approach to the Second World War by the incoming regime, when it was new, of Franjo Tudjman in Croatia in the 1990s. It's an approach that was perhaps embodied by a failed initiative by Ronald Reagan when he was president of the United States, to visit a grave of war victims that included the graves of SS officers in Germany, which was intended as a gesture of reconciliation. It was intended as a way of saying SS officers were victims as well, an argument which is perhaps true, but was certainly controversial. And what you see in the photo there is the song that was written by the punk rock group the Ramones in protest of that event. So Ronald Reagan at the SS cemetery with the title of the song, Bonzo Goes to Bitburg. Why is this policy pursued? Priscilla Hainer has looked at examples of truth-telling initiatives in several countries, and here are the main reasons that she gives. The main motivations for seeking a policy of forgive and forget, or moving on, or reconciliation as opposed to truth-telling, are first, fear of negative consequences. This particularly applies in cases of political instability, lack of political will or political interest on the part of the incoming regime and the people taking power to pursue a confrontation, the emergence of other priorities that are urgent and stand in the way of truth-telling initiatives, or alternative mechanisms that are preferred over comprehensive truth-telling, in particular ones that are based on a kind of community-based reconciliation and a therapeutic approach. I would add another item to the list that is offered by Priscilla Hayner, and that is this, that very commonly you encounter the perception that the impulse to tell truth is either not sincere, it covers up another interest, or its origin is not domestic. It is an initiative imposed by international actors, and this is frequently the case. What I want to do in the next segment is to talk about some instances where the policy of forgive, forget, and move on has been the preferred policy, and try to look a little bit at what happened in those instances.